Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Anton Enus, and I'm very pleased to be here. It's such an exciting week, isn't it? It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. The Sydney Writers' Festival, of course, one of the highlights of the year. This event, of course, not directly involved with the Sydney Writers' Festival, but we're kind of overlapping a little in that we're borrowing one of the stars of the Sydney Writers' Festival this year. Fatima Bhutto, of course, fresh off the plane after her opening address in Sydney last night, which I understood was very well received. I was working, unfortunately, I wasn't there. But Fatima comes from one of the most famous political families in the world. And I think it's true to say that the Bhuttos are to Pakistan, in a sense, the way the Kennedys are to the US, or the Gandhis to India, or the Badranaikas to Sri Lanka. Fatima's family, the Bhuttos, of course, synonymous with wealth and power and, unfortunately, bloodshed as well. So we're very pleased, Fatima, that you could join us, not only at the festival in Sydney, but here in Melbourne. And how lovely to be speaking to you on such a lovely, summery Melbourne evening, isn't it?
It's just like Karachi this time of year.
So is that a fair comment? Do you think that the Bhuttos are like the Kennedys were? They're just kind of one step short of royalty.
You know, it's a strange comparison, because it sort of mythologizes what should be or who should be ordinary people. And the minute you make someone like the Kennedys or like the someone else, you bring in a certain kind of glamour that really shouldn't be there, or a certain kind of excitement that doesn't have a place there. And you also separate them then from other people, and they become somewhat untouchable or excusable. And I think that's dangerous. And it certainly has been dangerous in Pakistan.
Okay, we've got lots and lots of questions. We want to sort of divide it up into the family stuff and general politics and, you know...
And Osama bin Laden and...
Yeah. That's where I was going to start, because coming from a news background, that's the obvious place to start. As Julie Andrews said in The Sound of Music.
Yes.
So, the fallout. I mean, it's, you know, there's a million theories about what happened, who knew what, who was responsible. Is it conceivable in any way that the authorities in Pakistan could not have known that he was there all the time?
Well, this is the question that all of us want to know, really. You know, and I said this yesterday, but it takes a certain kind of aplomb to insist you didn't know that he was living in your country. And he wasn't living in a cave, you know, he was living in just about the most banal suburb of the country, 2 hours from the capital. And it takes, and it's aplomb and more aplomb and more aplomb. You didn't know he was there. You didn't know definitely that he wasn't there over the last 9 months when the Americans knew. You didn't know they were coming to kill him. You didn't realize American helicopters entered your airspace. You didn't realize they left from your airbase. And there's a lot of didn't knows. No one's saying anything to us in Pakistan, so it's been 3 weeks now and the president hasn't said anything. All he's done is, you know, what all sort of befuddled leaders do when in trouble, which is that he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post. The prime minister was in France on an international tour and didn't issue comment until he was on a plane back from Paris. And then it took him another 10 days to say anything of any length when he spoke before the parliament. And the army has said that there were intelligence shortcomings.
Understatement.
Intelligence shortcomings, but then they added that it was their unparalleled cooperation that has led to more Al-Qaeda captures in Pakistan than any other country, which sounds like a fishy thing to be bragging about. But
It seems, though, that Pakistan is putting itself between a rock and a hard place, because either they knew he was there, in which case they're playing a very dangerous game in their relations with the United States, or they didn't know, which means they failed fundamentally as a government.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that I think what gets left out of all this equation is the hot pursuit agreement, which for some reason no one's talking about, though they really should be only talking about that. And the hot pursuit agreement was signed by General Pervez Musharraf, Pakistan's last dictator-president, and General Stanley McChrystal. And what it says is that at any time America would like, they have the right to enter Pakistan and conduct capture and kill operations on our soil. And part of this agreement is Pakistan's right to pretend they had no idea any of this was happening. Why aren't we talking about that now? You know, it also seems interesting that immediately after Osama bin Laden was killed, it wasn't Al-Qaeda, but it was the Pakistani Taliban that issued a statement saying that they were going to take revenge on the Pakistani state. And the Pakistani state went hysterical to say, no, we didn't know. Don't look at us. We were sleeping. But that is ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous that an IT consultant in Abbottabad who live tweeted the raid knew more about it than the president, who claims to have been sleeping soundly until President Obama called him. All of it's ridiculous, actually.
So I'll ask you something that we did a truncated version of this interview for television purposes earlier. I'll ask you a question I asked you then. So what's the fallout of that now? I mean, to what extent does that government have to bear the consequences?
And I think this, again, you know, is perhaps more edifying than it should be. But if Pakistan was harboring Osama bin Laden sneakily all these years without anybody knowing, how is it possible then that when he is killed in the country, American aid hasn't been cut? American aid hasn't been cut. You've heard quite nice things said about the government by Hillary Clinton, by President Obama, who insist that actually, you know, it's a difficult sort of situation, but we really would quite like to move on with Pakistan. They've just sent John Kerry to the country. They're not behaving in the way you would behave with a country that's just been harboring your most wanted enemy. You know, is it Pakistan protecting its own back? Is Pakistan too frightened to admit that they assisted America in the operation because they fear reprisals from their own people? It certainly seems like it. And if America really does believe that Pakistan held back, they're going very soft on them. You know, the director of the head of the CIA, Leon Panetta, said that the Pakistani government was either knowledgeable or incompetent, but the Pakistani government is usually both. So
it's a very complex relationship, though, isn't it, between the United States and Pakistan? In a sense, you could argue, and in fact the Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani was saying just this week that there's what he calls a trust deficit between the two countries now. But you could argue, I suppose, now that they're not so much allies, but they're two countries that need each other for different reasons.
I mean, America definitely needs Pakistan, that's for certain. But Pakistan doesn't particularly need America. The government needs America. These governments need America because it is via American aid money and American support that they remain in power. But Pakistan is a country. You know, we're a country of 180 million people. We're a nuclear power. We have oil reserves. We have gas reserves. We're supposed to grow the food we need to feed our people. We don't need America. America needs us at this point. And
yet you've got the $20 billion in US aid over 10 years.
Yes.
What would happen if you didn't get that?
It would mean less vacations for the president. It would mean slightly fewer summer homes. But, you know, this $20 million that have come in over the last 10 years haven't gone to the Pakistani people. They go to the Pakistani military, which is already an enormous institution in the country. The Pakistani military takes between 30% to 60% of the annual budget. They don't need extra money. The Pakistani military also is interesting because they are a sort of corporation. They're Army Inc. So they are not only an army, they're not only a political sort of powerhouse, but they are the largest owners of real estate in the country. They own banks, they make cement, they make cereal, they make bottled water. So they don't need the money. And then the rest of the money goes to the Pakistani government. And this is a government that is known worldwide for its corruption. You know, according to the New York Times, the last time they were in power, this government, they took between $2 to $3 billion from the Pakistani treasury. The president was facing corruption charges in Switzerland. He was convicted in Switzerland. He was facing charges in the United Kingdom, in France. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where that aid money is going. But at the same time, in Pakistan, and I always use this example, and it should be the example because this is what corruption means in Pakistan. We missed our millennium goals to eradicate polio. Not because we don't have the medical know-how in Pakistan, which we do. For example, Pakistan got leprosy under the WHO control limits ahead of schedule. But we missed the millennium goals to eradicate polio because we couldn't refrigerate the vaccines. We couldn't supply electricity to refrigerators to keep them running. And that's what corruption does. So if you take away those $20 billion, it doesn't affect Pakistan. It affects the establishment of Pakistan, the political establishment, not the people.
So you have a civilian government, and you have this military which is sort of weaved in and out of power over the decades. Who's really in control?
Well, but looking at it, no one. No one, but at the moment you've got a bit of a trinity. You've got a civilian government, you have the military, and then you have America. And it seems to us that whatever it is America would like us to do, one of the two will carry out the orders, but one of them will definitely, if not both.
Well, one of the wonderful things about your book, of course, is that it gives context. It's wonderfully contextualizing for those of us who are far away, don't really understand the nuances of that situation and the region. But one of the things you write about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, of course, the sort of the patriarch of the Bhutto family, in the 60s when he was foreign minister, there was this kind of dance between, does Pakistan lean towards the United States, does it lean towards China, is it Russia? Do you feel Pakistan is once again in that kind of, uncertain area?
It's not, it should be slightly more uncertain, but Pakistan has put all its eggs in the American basket at this point. There's a wonderful journalist in Pakistan, and if any of you here are Pakistani or you follow the news, you may know him, called Imran Aslam. And Imran Aslam edited one of Pakistan's largest English newspapers, and he now runs Geo, which is the largest private television station. And some years ago, Imran Aslam was so fed up at the state of American interference that he made a petition and delivered it to the American consulate in Karachi, asking to become the 51st state of America. They didn't find it very funny. They didn't give him a visa for years. But this is the feeling in Pakistan, that we're not actually caught between China and America. If only we were caught between someone else, or if only there were other choices. It's really just America, and they say in Pakistan that you have, three forces, three A's decide the country. It's Allah, the army, and America.
We'll come back to that thought, but let's just get back to the Bhutto name. I saw this quote from Benazir. She wrote a memoir called Daughter of the East a few years ago. I didn't choose this life, it chose me. Do you feel, as a Bhutto, that you're, in a different sense, in the same position, in that there's a weight of responsibility from having that name?
No. No, because I think that the idea that somehow 6 letters of a last name saddle you with some kind of duty or responsibility is a disingenuous one. And certainly it is a family that has had a very public life. They've had a very involved political life. But you can make of that what you choose to. And if one chooses to get into politics, then that's a choice. It's not something that finds you. And that was what was interesting about researching this book, is that I had assumed growing up that this was a family that things happened to. Power happened to them. They didn't really look for it. It just, it came to them. But not only did they look for it and did they seek it out, but once they had it, they were very reluctant to let go of it. You might say that some of them are still very reluctant to let go of it.
Let me ask you about that, in fact, because the Bhuttos were fabulously wealthy, they were landowners, very successful in business and so on. Why that transition into politics?
Not particularly in business, actually.
No.
No, but they were feudal landowners, and the influence and the politics came with the landowning. And so when they came to Sindh, in what is now Pakistan, from India, they came as part of a movement that was told by the British Raj there was this great amount of agricultural land in the Sindh province, and it was too difficult to cultivate. And so the Raj administrator said, anyone who can cultivate this land can keep it. And the Bhutto tribe, and they are a tribe, came as part of this wave. And as they cultivated more land, their influence increased. And as their influence increased, they then began to mediate between other tribes and disputes in the area in exchange for more land, which gave them more influence. So it went sort of hand in hand.
So Benazir, to me, is a fascinating character, because she's so many different things. She's an enigma, I think, to a lot of people. I want to ask you about the huddled laws, but the huddled laws, maybe you can explain to us what they are and how they affect women. But in the light of that, let's contextualize this quote from Benazir. I am a female politician fighting to bring modernity, communication, education, and technology to Pakistan. In the light of those huddled laws, does that ring true for you?
No. And maybe we can put it this way. Outside of Pakistan, Benazir was known as three things. She was known as a feminist, she was known as a liberal, and she was known as a Democrat. If we work backwards, those are not the reputations she had in Pakistan. First, the Democrat. She had declared herself unilaterally the chairperson for life of the Pakistan People's Party, which is something you see usually in North Korea or Pyongyang or places like that. But you don't see them in places where you're supposed to have at least a representative form of democracy. But that's what Benazir did. She never ran for an election within her own party. She came to the head of the chairpersonship, if that's a word, and then she kept it. And that was her official title, chairperson for life. In terms of liberal, it was under Benazir's last government that the Taliban in Afghanistan were not only aided and supported by Pakistan, but when the Taliban took over in 1996, only 3 countries in the world recognized them and were willing to do business with them: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Benazir's Pakistan. Again, this usually gets left out of the whole liberal thing. And when it comes to her being a feminist, you have to go back to the huddled laws, which you mentioned. And for those of you who don't know, the huddled laws were put into place in 1979 in Pakistan by General Zia-ul-Haq. And they're federal laws, and they apply to anyone of any nationality all across the country. And what they say is that any woman who commits the crime of adultery can and should be put to death. And any woman who engages in premarital sexual intercourse can and should be put to death. The huddled laws also had, they had additional bits. So according to the huddled laws, if a woman had been raped, she had to provide 4 male witnesses. They had to be good Muslims, and the list of what makes a good Muslim, you've never met this person in your life. They can't have cheated, they can't have stolen, they can't have missed a prayer, they can't have ever skipped school. And not only do these 4 good Muslims have to be witnesses, but they have to witness the rape at the exact moment of penetration.
Oh.
Otherwise it doesn't count. And Benazir was prime minister 2 times. She served 2 times, she had 2 terms in office. And not once did she attempt to remove the huddled laws. She didn't even attempt to amend the huddled laws. In fact, the only time that the huddled laws have ever been touched was under General Musharraf's time. And all he did was remove this business about the witnesses. So they just amended it to say, if she says she's been raped, she's been raped. But that's impossible to carry out on a local level. I mean, how do you're going to go to every police station in the country and say, the only thing you can do with the huddled laws is to repeal them.
So do you think there was a time that Benazir was a conviction politician, but just got seduced by the thought of having power rather than not having power?
I think there was a time that she was an incredibly brave politician, and there was a time when she was a very committed activist. And when she was fighting in the very early 80s against Zia-ul-Haq's dictatorship, she did so at the risk of her own safety and at the risk of her life. She was put under house arrest, she was sentenced to actual arrest, and she continued. And she was a great symbol of opposition against the dictatorship. But she was easily co-opted. So General Zia-ul-Haq deposes her father in 1977, and he has him murdered in 1979. And by 1986, Benazir has entered into power-sharing negotiations. With the same man. So I don't know if you can be a conviction politician and do that.
You write quite eloquently about how close you were to her as a child and how loving that relationship was. In fact, you write about when she was growing up with your father, Murtaza. Murtaza adored his older sister, who was known as Pinky.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with her and his relationship with her?
Well, she was the first child born into the family. And they were born very close together, so they were about 1.5 years apart. And she was, like I suppose all eldest children are, and maybe all eldest daughters, precocious and confident and in charge. And amongst her siblings, she was always the one who was in charge. She told people what they had to do and how they had to do it, and she made sure everything was running in the way that it had to be. And, I think he adored her because he depended on that as a young boy. Pinky made things ordered. And of course that changes as they grow older and as their personalities develop and they grow to have very different ideas about the world and how things should work. But as a child, I was the first grandchild born into the family. And I was often told, both as a compliment, I say in the book, and as an admonishment, oh, you're just like your aunt. Because, you're the first child, people indulge you, and you grow to think that you're allowed to have opinions on things that maybe other 4-year-olds don't, or whatever the case is. And she was incredibly loving, as a child. Even as a child, you had a sense with Benazir that she was a woman in an incredibly vulnerable position, that she was somebody who you wanted to protect, who you wanted to take care of. And for her part, she was very generous. She was very generous with her time. She used to read me stories. She would take me out to playgrounds. And she never said things like, oh, we're with the adults right now, we can't talk to you, I can't read you. This thing. We liked the same, very disgusting sort of foods, like chocolate chip ice cream, which my mother says is like toothpaste, but my aunt...
She didn't teach you to read Mills and Boon, though, surely?
She did not teach me to read Mills and Boon. She was famous for liking romance novels, by the way, which is... I think she was outed by William Dalrymple, who went to write...
Quite rightly so.
Quite rightly so. But no, she taught me to read, Jemima Puddle Duck and the Beatrix Potter books. I think I was too young for Mills and Boon as a 4-year-old. But she was a very warm woman, but, that was before power.
So can you trace a time when that started changing, the way you interacted with her?
Yeah, I think I can. But, these things don't happen overnight, and I think people struggle with the idea of how does someone who is so promising go from that to leading one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and the New York Times accusing them of graft in the billions. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual change, I think. And in 1986, 1 year after her youngest brother Shahnawaz is killed, she enters into these power-sharing negotiations. And she was preparing to become Zia-ul-Haq's prime minister, the prime minister to his presidency. And it was her
the man who had killed her father.
And who she believed killed her brother. And it was her incredible good fortune that he died before then. And she ended up then becoming the prime minister to his deputy. So it was the same government, just with a different face. And to do so, she had to accept a tremendous amount of conditions that were put forward by the army. And those conditions were that she had to abide by IMF agreements. She had to allow the army to choose her cabinet for her. The army would determine her foreign policy as it related to Kashmir, India, and Afghanistan. And she said yes to those things. And she didn't need to. At that time, when she returned to Pakistan after a period of exile in 1986, 87, 1 million people came to receive her at the airport. She could have done anything she wanted. And the only reason to negotiate with the army was power, an easy power, power that you didn't have to fight for anymore. And she had been fighting for it for some time.
So here we have Benazir, who's an intelligent, independent, beautiful woman who's very aware of her self-worth. She's ambitious. She's a modern woman in every sense. I could be talking about you, Fatima. This sounds exactly like you as well. But anyway, that's beside the point. Here we have this woman with all these qualities. She could have any suitor.
Oh,
presumably,
that's where this was going.
Any suitor she could want in Karachi, in Pakistan indeed. And yet she chose Asif Ali Zardari, by all accounts, not the most outstanding character. Why do you think that happened?
Well, maybe it adds some context to say that she also considered Yasser Arafat. And what was perhaps not modern about Benazir was that she felt that she couldn't ascend to the highest office in the land as a single woman. She felt that it would place her in a vulnerable position, that it would open her to scandal, and that if she was going to be prime minister, she really had to be married. And this is not very modern, of course, we know, because women's involvement in Pakistani politics didn't start with Benazir. It goes back very early. It goes back to the 1960s. The founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, had a sister called Fatima Jinnah. And when he died, Fatima Jinnah remained obviously in Pakistan and in fact contested an election against Ayub Khan, who was the country's first dictator. And Fatima Jinnah was unmarried. She was a single woman. She didn't cover her hair. She wore saris and went to parliament. She lost the election, but that's because you don't tend to win against dictators. But so there was a precedent that would have said to Benazir, actually, you don't have to do this. And she felt she did. How it was that she managed to pick Asif Zardari in particular, I honestly couldn't tell you.
From what I understand, there was elements of an arranged marriage in this. It was formally done between the parents and so on. It
was an arranged marriage, and Benazir was the only. She was the only woman in her family to have an arranged marriage. Her parents didn't marry out of an arranged marriage. They married out of love, and all those around her, her sort of uncles and aunts, none of them had arranged marriages. But she was on a clock. She had to get married soon. And I was there during their courtship, actually. And I was there at the point when she said she knew she was going to marry him. She had been... This is all in the book, but just for fun. He had taken her and us, and me, I guess, to an amusement park. And she'd gotten stung by a bee and on her hand. And when she got stung by a bee, he went and asked for some ice for her hand. And that's when she decided she'd marry him.
Oh.
I mean...
Well, how can you say no?
So if the bar is that low, I guess.
So we have this situation with, sort of on a more serious note, these horrible deaths that occur in your family, starting with Zulfikar and Shahnawaz, then your father, and then Benazir. Before her own death, she's kind of in the background, operating in some way during both of those assassinations. I'm struggling to understand, what do you think her responsibility might have been there?
With her brothers, you mean?
Yeah, both brothers.
Well, in her brother's case, in Shahnawaz's case, he is killed in 1985, and it's 1 year later that she enters into those power-sharing negotiations. And the family always believed that it was Zia-ul-Haq's government that had ordered and carried out Shahnawaz's murder. And one of the conditions, we spoke just a minute ago about the conditions that the army imposed on her, the IMF and the foreign policy, and one of the other conditions was that she didn't open an investigation into her brother's murder. And she said, okay. And so Shahnawaz was killed in 1985, and till now, nobody has been held accountable in his murder. There hasn't been an investigation in Pakistan. There was never an investigation in Pakistan. There was never an inquiry, nothing. So that's that. And whether she felt that this was an acceptable choice to make, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that for her. All we know is that that was a condition and she accepted it. When it comes to my father's murder, it's slightly different because she is the prime minister at the time. She's the head of state. And he is an elected member of parliament at the time that he's killed. And Benazir presided over a genocidal state of affairs in Karachi at the time. So in her second government, she had empowered the police forces and the security agencies of Karachi under the aegis of Operation Cleanup, which is what it was called, to, quote, clean up the city of Karachi. And what that meant is that in the year and a half that Operation Cleanup was in effect, some 3,000 men were murdered in Karachi in extrajudicial killings. These 3,000 men were political activists, they belonged to opposing political parties, they were journalists, they were lawyers, they were innocent bystanders. And Benazir not only empowered the police force to go after these people in this way, but she condoned that violence publicly on many occasions and protected the police that carried out these killings. So she certainly bears a moral responsibility in that there is an atmosphere of this sort of violence that's taking place. And after her brother was killed, her government and her in particular play an interesting role in the immediate aftermath in terms of the cover-up. So my father was killed along with 6 other men, and all of the witnesses and survivors of the assassination were arrested. And they were held without access to lawyers or to their family. They didn't know on what grounds they were being held. And they were kept in jail until Benazir's government fell, about 2 months later. But at the same time, all the police involved were honorably cleared in a police review and put back on their beats. So they never spent a minute being suspended. It was her government also that stopped us from filing a police case. So in Pakistan, every citizen has the right to file a first information report, an FIR, in the event of any grievance. And our family was stopped from that. So we had to go to the courts to get that right returned to us. And of course, in the years that followed, her and her husband, the current president, Asif Zardari, haven't been particularly good at proclaiming their innocence. Benazir eulogized several of the people involved in her brother's killing, or accused of being involved in her brother's killing. She invited one of the men, a man called Masood Sharif, who at the time was the head of the intelligence bureau, and he was on the road that night. She invited him to join the central committee of her party, which is not something you do to somebody who's been accused in your brother's killing. Her husband, on his first Pakistan Day as president in 2009, gave a national medal to one of the police accused in the killing, a man called Shoaib Sadal, who was accused along with Asif Zardari in the murder. He gave him a national medal for services to the Pakistani people. And as the years go by, there's really not an effort to proclaim innocence, because as it turns out, the Pakistani state knows that they can do what they like and get away with it. We've got decades worth of examples.
You write quite heartbreakingly about how your father was killed and the events leading up to it and the hours after. It seems like the factual account of it is that this was not a rogue event. It was It was clearly premeditated. He was he was ambushed, in a sense, by the police. He was taken into their custody, was in the police car and then shot in the head while in police custody. Somebody must have ordered that.
Yes. Yes, and somebody did order that. And what the police had said at the time was that we came to arrest him. We came to arrest him, and there was a firefight, and this is what happened. And in the investigation that followed, which was a state investigation, forensically and ballistically, they found that there was no firefight. And 15 years later, we've yet to see a warrant. I mean, they didn't even bother to forge a warrant. Till now, we've yet to see a warrant produced that would support the police claims. And what happened in the aftermath of the murder is that Benazir's government stopped us from filing criminal charges. And instead, she put in place a tribunal that was to investigate the assassination, but that had no legal authority to pass sentence. So it was basically a stalling mechanism. But this same tribunal concluded that the order to assassinate Murtaza Bhutto could only have come from the highest level of government. And it stopped short of naming her. But at the time, as Prime Minister, there was nobody higher than Benazir.
It seems inconceivable, though, don't you think, that given their history together and the close relationship, there's blood there, that she could do such a thing? What is your gut feeling?
You know, it's not only about gut feelings. I mean, I think if we look also at the history that preceded that, it doesn't seem so surprising. When was it? In 1994, on the anniversary of their father's birth, Benazir's police force, and this operation was led by one of the men who was involved then, later in my father's killing, a man called Wajid Durrani. They surrounded the family house in Larkana. It wasn't the first time this had happened. On the 5th of January, which is the day that Zulfikar Bhutto was born, usually the family marks his birth by going to the family graveyard, offering prayers, and then they have a ceremony to mark the birth. And in 1994, it was the first year that it wasn't just Benazir doing this marking, but my father was back in the country, even though he had been arrested by his sister, he was in jail, but that people representing him would also go to mark this occasion. And this was not something that the Prime Minister wanted. And what she did was she put the city of Larkana under lockdown. And as if that wasn't enough, then she put a cordon around the family house. So her mother, Nusrat, was inside the house at the time. And my mother was in the house at the time. And there was a lot of people that had come to mark this occasion with the family. And what the cordon did is it meant that nobody could get out of the cordon. Nobody could get into it. And the police opened fire. And when they opened fire, the Prime Minister's mother left the house to stop, to see what was happening, and the police shot at her. A man stood in front of her, and he was hit by the bullet. And the police did not allow the cordon to be lifted for an ambulance to take him to a hospital. And he later died of his injuries. This is almost a replay of what happened in 1996. And
so the context is that she was a kind of cold-blooded operator?
Well, the police were certainly cold-blooded operators.
But she had the power to do something about that.
She did have the powers to do something about that, and she didn't. She didn't lift the cordon. They cut the electricity. They kept the cordon for another 24 hours or so. And at no point was there an acknowledgement that an excess amount of force had been used.
In fact, when your father was held in prison, you begged her to come with the family to see him. And what did she say to you?
Well, I had asked her because it did seem ridiculous to me at the time, though I was 11. It did seem ridiculous to me that this could be happening between brother and sister, even though they had very, very divergent political views, that they could be so opposed to each other. And it must be people around her. It must be this sort of cabal of people that surround anyone in any powerful position that has separated her from her family. And so I asked her. We were allowed to see my father when he was in jail for once a week for 45 minutes. And I knew that my aunt was in Karachi, and I called her and said, look, please come with us. I'm sure once you two are together in a room, you can talk. You have to please come with us. And she said, okay, well, let me see what I can do. I'll get back to you, which are famous last words whenever anyone in Paris says that to you. Don't hold your breath for an answer. And the day passed with nothing. No answer, and I called and called and called and couldn't get through. And finally, in the night, she picked up the phone and said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't come because the office closed and I can't get permission.
You can't get permission as the Prime Minister?
As the Prime Minister.
So, taking one step backwards, your father paid with his life. He was held in prison before that. Mm. And yet he chose to come back home from exile. Mm-hmm. Given Pakistan's history and the kind of history of political violence, why did he do that?
I think the answer goes back in some way to the fact that it is such a young country. Now it is only 64 years old. And the idea that this is Pakistan's fate is unacceptable to Pakistanis. The rest of the world might watch Pakistan and say, well, this is a failed state. You hear this phrase a lot. But to those of us who live there and who love the country, in no way can it have failed. Governments fail and establishments fail, but the country can't fail. And I think he had this idea, very much so, that it was the establishment that was wrong. It was the way of doing politics that was wrong. But that there was enormous promise for this country. And also, it was a promise that he had seen, mutilated over his lifetime. And it was a promise that he felt his father had in many ways inspired, and that his father had paid with his life for. And to see that same promise and that same name being used now and abused, I think was only bearable for so long. And there's only so long you can stand outside, maybe without saying anything. But that aside, he had lived in exile for 16 years. And there wasn't one day of those 16 years that he didn't occupy Pakistan somewhere in his mind. He could have had a very comfortable life living abroad. It would have been a safe life. It would have been an easy life. But it wasn't the life he wanted.
Mm. Well, I've just been given a signal that we need to take some questions from the floor, so we'll go there in a moment. I believe we've got some ushers with microphones wandering around. And do we want people to come to the usher? Yeah. So if you have a question, if you could indicate to the usher, we'll get to you in a moment. There's somebody indicating. But if we could, Fatima, just take one more step backwards. When I was reading the book, it seemed to me that there was one very dramatic moment when Zulfikar, your grandfather, was condemned to die by Zia-ul-Haq. He was in prison for a while before the actual execution. And then he writes a letter to his two sons, Murtaza and Shahnawaz, saying, you must avenge my death. And it seems to me that that was a watershed moment for your family.
Yeah, it was. It was about a month before he was killed. He had sent a letter out to Murtaza. And in it he said, if you do not avenge my death, you are not my sons. And at the time that he sent this letter, Murtaza was 25 years old and Shahnawaz was 21 years old. And it was a decision, well, I mean, that they took it up. So one cannot blame Zulfikar alone, because they could have said no. They could have said...
Could they have?
Well, they should have said. I mean, they couldn't have maybe, but they should have said, there is another way, there ought to be another way, and avenging someone's death doesn't literally mean avenging their death. But they were incredibly young, I mean, much younger than I am now, sitting here. And it was a choice that not only impacted their lives, but I think also their deaths, and our lives. It changed everything. And I don't know if they had been given the same choice over again, would they have taken it in hindsight, seeing what happened? You know, Shahnawaz lost his own life. How much longer? 6 years later. And it put them in a very vulnerable position. It made them marked men, that choice to avenge their father's death.
What about the future? We know that Benazir, for instance, has 3 children, Bilawal, Batawa, and Asifa. Mm-hmm. You have a couple of siblings. Mm-hmm. And Bilawal seems to be the kind of chosen one. Mm. What's going to happen? Is there going to be a next Bhutto in power?
Well, I can only speak for our family, and we were never raised to think of the country as some sort of family business that we sort of entered into once we came of age. So, no, not from our side. Not from us, you won't see that kind of thing.
It's interesting that William Dalrymple, in his book At the Court of the Fish-Eyed Goddess, he's about to meet Benazir, and he's warned to never to address her as Mrs. Bhutto. It's Ms. Bhutto. So that, you know, it's those kind of things are important. And we know with Bilawal, there's been some controversy about the name. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
We were very polite, Anton. I think when you say some controversy, you mean that they changed their names. That the Zardaris changed their names to Bhuttos. So that they could, I don't know why actually someone would change their name, but it feeds into this idea which has destroyed the political culture of Pakistan, that politics is about names, and politics is about letters, and politics is about personality, and not about ideas, and not about platforms, and not about records. And I think it's been incredibly dangerous for the country. Dynasty was already dangerous for the country, but you know, this sort of bold-faced pandering to it makes it more dangerous, I think.
Excuse me, I will get you in just 1 second, but I have to just ask this, Fatima. The kind of the stuff the horrible stuff that's happened was the previous generation.
Yeah.
How do you get on with your current generation, your cousins?
I don't.
There's no contact between you?
No.
Any desire for any reconciliation there?
Well, you know, I think we are very, 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 very different people. And I think we were raised in very, very different ways. And I think they're very young. I wish them well. I hope that they're safe and that they do what it is they want, but it's not my path. Okay,
let's get to the questions. We'll go 1 and then 2.
Fatima, why did Zia bring in the Hudud laws?
Zia-ul-Haq was a fundamentalist, essentially. I mean, he's the reason, you know, when you think about Pakistan being a sort of militantly or fundamentalistly, if that's a word, Islamist state, it comes from Zia-ul-Haq. So Zia-ul-Haq not only brought in the Hudud laws, which are very, you know, they have nothing to do with actual Islam. I mean, they're a real distortion of Islamic law. Very Wahhabi, very Saudi-inspired. But he also brought in the blasphemy laws. He also made it mandatory, for example, for all women anchors on television to cover their hair, to wear a hijab. He made 5 times a day prayers mandatory in all office and government buildings. And he really changed the face of Pakistan. At the time, Pakistan was called the Islamic Republic, but it was by and large quite secular, and you didn't have the state mandating religion in that way until Zia-ul-Haq.
Gentleman here.
Ms. Bhutto, on a personal level, how have you coped with that, the degree of loss that you've had to suffer? And as part of that question, have you ever felt like just getting away from it all and just removing yourself from the environment, the physical, in other words, not living in Pakistan anymore?
How has one coped? You know, I think we were very lucky as kids to have the parents we had. And growing up, you know, my father raised me for a while as a single parent. And growing up, there was never, while we were very conscious of the fact that we lived in exile, that we were living in a country that wasn't our own, that we were speaking a language that wasn't our own, and that there was this melancholy around it, there was also this insistence on living, not just surviving, but on living. And my mother as well, is a survivor of the Lebanese Civil War. She spent her childhood really in bomb shelters and basements and bunkers, and she left only in 1982 once the Israeli invasion, the first Israeli invasion, happened. And for her it was the same. So we were never made to feel afraid, actually. We were always made to feel that we could and should survive anything. And I think we were very fortunate to have parents like that. So really it's nothing to do with us being clever or anything. It's all them. And ever wanted to get away. I don't think you can get away from that kind of thing. I mean, my father and I lived in exile in Syria for a period, and you didn't really get away from it. He didn't get away from his brother's murder or his father's assassination. At the end of the day, Pakistan is home, and if we leave it, we know in whose hands we're leaving it, and that's an even more frightening scenario, I think, than staying in the country.
Ginwa, of course, has taken up the cudgels where Murtaza left off. And I know this is an awkward question, but do you fear for her? I mean, given what all that's happened to your family, for her to be a prominent politician, that's a tough thing.
Yeah. I think, though, what is probably even tougher is that the state of Pakistan today, you fear for everybody. At the time that I was growing up, my father wasn't the only person I knew who was killed in that way. I had friends who lost fathers or grandfathers or uncles or brothers in that kind of violence. It wasn't something that was unique to us. So you grew up seeing it and hearing it. And it is frightening. And the only thing you can do, really, my mother always says, and maybe this answers a bit of the gentleman's question, when we were younger and I think we were more worried about this kind of thing, my mother would always say, well, it's not going to happen because we're going to live differently. And we're going to live in a way that makes that sort of thing impossible. And so we try. We try to do that. We try to live differently, and we try to focus on different things. The focus then can't be on revenge. It has to be on justice. I think that protects you in some ways. And also, nothing scares my mother. I mean, she's sort of the toughest. She's ultra tough. We were once, so I have this really awful travel history, which I was saying to Perry today. I was in New York when 9/11 happened. I was a student there. I was in London when 7/7 happened, also coincidentally a student there. And we were in Lebanon visiting my grandparents in 2006 when the war broke out. And my brother and I, we were in Tripoli, which is in the north of the country. And Lebanon is, like this big, so even though Tripoli wasn't being bombed directly initially, we would hear every day the bombing that was happening around us. And the first night that Tripoli was bombed, sorry, this is a digression, but I'll get to my point in a second. It was something like 3 a.m, and my brother and I were sitting, we were awake watching TV. And the sound of a bomb falling is like unlike anything you've ever heard. You hear it breaking through the sound barrier. You hear it before you feel it. And my brother and I just went into complete hysterics. We had no idea what to do. And we ran into our mother's room. She was fast asleep. And we went, "Mommy, wake up." And she goes, "What?" We said, "They've bombed the city." And she goes, She sort of sits up and she goes, "Are the windows broken?" And we said, "No." She goes, "It's far away." And she goes back to sleep.
No.
You can't frighten her. It's impossible.
But even at 70 Clifton, there was a kind of, even the kids then knew when there was gunfire, if there was something happening outside, there was a kind of, you knew what to do.
You learn these things. I mean, it's strange how quickly and how instinctive it is to know where to go in the event of gunfire. And I knew at the age of 12 what to do in the event of gunfire, because it wasn't just my house that was shot at, but my school was shot at several occasions. And you learn that stuff, you pick that stuff up pretty quickly. Yeah.
Hey, Fatima, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, in an interview, Benazir was asked whether she was behind your father's killing or something like that. And she actually threw the microphone then,
Yeah.
and then she replied saying, it was my brother who was killed, not yours, and you don't have a right to ask the question.
Yeah.
My second question is, you've talked about the role of army in Pakistan, the corrupt government, Osama bin Laden, Taliban, extremism, and we don't require US support to survive. So what kind of Pakistan, if any, do you see in like 5 to 10 years?
So your first point was, yes, there was a television show called Jawab De, which means give answers. And Benazir was asked about my father's murder. And she was, the question was, you were the prime minister. How can you say you had nothing to do with it? And she took off her microphone and threw it on the ground and walked off. And then she came back and put the microphone back. And said, he was my, just as you said, he said, he was my brother, not yours. And then she made some strange reference to Jackie Kennedy that I can't really remember. Something like, would you ask Jackie Kennedy how she felt when, which again had nothing to do with the topic. What kind of Pakistan do we see in 5 to 10 years? And
Do you reckon it was just an act of drama, or was she regretting it by then?
I don't know. I don't know. She was very dramatic. But if she had begun to regret her government's role in the murder, she could have then come out and spoken. She could have illuminated what happened, and she didn't. I mean, up until the end, she defended her role. So in terms of Pakistan for the future, and this goes back to that, you know, this idea of promise. Pakistan is a country of incredible promise. Not only is it a young country, but it has something like 60% of its population is under the age of 30. You have a country that has the agricultural land with which it can feed all of its people. Not only all of its people, but even its neighbors if it needs to. But they are hungry, and that's, you know, that's corruption. We have oil reserves, we have gas reserves, we have the 5th largest copper mines in the world. There is no reason for Pakistan not to be a great force for progress and for change and for hope in the region. The only block is the government and the successive governments. So if we're able to change that, I think the potential is incredible. And part of changing that means not only ending this corrupt cycle, but it means getting the army to go back to the barracks, and it means ending dynasty.
But we've seen this major uprising throughout the region, throughout the, I mean, it's a groundbreaking movement that's been happening, but not in Pakistan.
Yes. You know what's incredible is that people say, well, why haven't the Arab Springs happened in Pakistan? And if we think, if we go back to Tunisia and we see that young man who set himself on fire, you know, he just set off this chain of events. People have been setting themselves on fire in Pakistan in protest for decades. You know, it hasn't triggered the same response. I don't know why that is. You know, you have an incredible amount, for example, as you do in India as well, of, you know, farmer suicides because of the incredible crushing poverty that people face on a daily basis, because of unemployment, because of food inflation. And why hasn't that resulted in the same kind of street protests? Maybe in part it's to do with literacy. You know, you've got a country that's supposed to be something like 40% literate, but the qualification for literacy in Pakistan is the ability to sign your name. So 40% is inflated then. It's harder to disseminate ideas when people can't read them. Maybe that's it. And also the fear, I think, is so much greater. Not only is violence used against politicians or against, you know, members of state, but you've had thousands of people disappeared since the war on terror started 10 years ago. You have these drone strikes. You know, you've got an incredible, overwhelming, crushing use of force against the Pakistani people. And I think that keeps them off the roads. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I think we will take the questions that remain. We won't add any more people to the queue. Thanks.
Hi, Fatima. I'm Ali I live in Lahore. I just want to ask a question that I've gone through your interviews and your lectures and your speeches. Like, maybe the people don't know here, but you know that Pakistan is a male-dominating country, and after the great Bhutto died, your father wants to get the power, but instead of your father, the Benazir got the power, and that's why it's like people say, critics say that it's a personal revenge of your family versus Bhutto family, that you can't get the power.
Sorry, my family versus the Bhutto family?
Like the Benazir. Your father versus your sister.
Oh, okay.
Okay, like that, people think that. And also in your like speeches and your lectures, it reflects the personal revenge and hatred, because you are not on the seat of Bilawal Bhutto at that now.
So your question is, am I bitter and hateful, and why?
Because your father not become a prime minister after the death of senior Bhutto.
Okay, sorry. So your question is, am I bitter and hateful because my father was not prime minister?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Hi, Fatima. Look, my question is, given that the status quo remains and that the government doesn't change, do you think the world should fear a nuclear-armed Pakistan, given that Pakistan's technology did arm North Korea, as far as we understand, and in the same way the ISI didn't know that Osama bin Laden was there, I don't know whether they knew that he was giving nuclear technology to North Korea.
I'm of the school of thought that any nuclear-armed country is a reason to be afraid. So for me, it's not more frightening that Pakistan is a nuclear country than it is frightening that France is a nuclear-armed country. But what I think is important is, this idea that Pakistan is now the 5th largest nuclear power in the world, and the arsenal is increasing. And at the rate it's increasing, we'll soon overtake Great Britain in the sort of top 4. That's worrying, not because of who controls the bomb, because anyone who controls the bomb we should be afraid of, but because the amount of money that goes into the nuclear program in Pakistan, it's an exorbitant amount, and it's an amount that we're not putting into health and we're not putting into education. And when you have a vacuum in those areas, then that vacuum is filled by other forces, and we've seen the rise of this Pakistani Taliban. They're not popular because of their sophisticated political ideology, but they're popular because they set up schools and they set up hospitals. And if we're serious about our country, then it should be the state doing that.
Hi. There's lots of diverging religious points of view in Pakistan at the moment, and Afghanistan. How would you see a government, you say it needs to be reformed, but how would you tackle those very strong and in some pockets very fundamental religious beliefs that seem to go up in arms and start all sorts of riots every time they try and tackle a religious law? I mean, I know you're critical of your aunt for not doing more, but do you think she was... I mean, you take one step at a time, and you can only do so much to stay in power while also being progressive. I know the status quo remains, but what would be your alternative to that?
I think the problem is that if one is going to stay in power and uphold the status quo, then you can't be progressive. They don't go together. And when it comes to religious, if I understood your question right, when it comes to religious forces, prior to 9/11, they were pathetically unpopular in Pakistan. So before 2001, religious parties took maybe 1 seat in parliament, maybe 2, maybe 3, but that was it. But they're always election allies. They are election allies of the PPP, of the PML. I mean, not just Benazir, of all of them. Yet it's the religious parties that benefit from having those alliances, not those bigger parties. And it's only since the war on terror began that now you have 20 seats in parliament, 30 seats in parliament. They formed provincial governments. And the causes are very clear. When you have a government, and it's not just this government, but certainly General Musharraf's government before it, that bends over backward to open Pakistan to America, to open Pakistan in a way that helps America fight our neighbors. the only places that you hear resistance to this, in some cases, come from religious parties. That's why they're popular, because they come out and say, we're a sovereign country. On the other hand, though, you know, when you talk about these protests on the road, it's like 100 people. I mean, they're not an amazing force. They're not galvanizing or shutting down cities. And even if you look at Osama bin Laden's murder just now, what city was shut down in Pakistan? None. I mean, they had a couple of protests in Multan or in Quetta or in Karachi, but it's like 100 angry people. That's it.
But in terms of religion and politics, I think that something that really shook me, and I thought was a very worrying factor, was the assassination of the Punjab governor, Salman Taseer. And his crime, of course, was that he spoke up against the capital punishment for blasphemy. And he paid for his life. He paid with his life for that.
You know, it's a tricky. Yeah, it's tricky. It's a difficult issue, this blasphemy law. I mean, on the other hand, people have been speaking against the blasphemy law for decades. I mean, for example, Asma Jahangir, who's also a very controversial figure in Pakistan, but in her legal career as a lawyer, as a very well-known lawyer, has always defended blasphemy cases and survived, and has always spoken about it and has survived. Salman Taseer also, you know, also represented a government that people see as being anti-people. And the reaction that was very disturbing after his death, in part maybe comes from that. I don't know. But the blasphemy laws have existed since at the same time as the hudud, and people have spoken about them very openly. And they continue to. What I think is worrying is that if you look at the text of the blasphemy law, again, what they were saying was that the blasphemy law should be amended. You know, the blasphemy law should be amended, and this woman shouldn't be put to death. But there are many men who get put to death as part of the blasphemy law. We don't talk about them. And what's very worrying about the blasphemy law is that it is, in fact, an act of blasphemy to say what the blasphemer did. Does that make sense? So if I accuse you of blasphemy, I can say Anton did something blasphemous and said something very rude about the Quran. I can't tell you what it is because I'm a good Muslim, and that would be blasphemy. And that's fine. You don't ever have to bring the charge forward. To repeat a charge is a blasphemous act. But most Pakistanis, I mean, if you have a country that is ethnically diverse, it's religiously diverse, and religion has become a factor in this way of late. Pakistanis are not all rabid fundamentalists, you know, who are desperate to put to death anyone who says something divergent from their point of view. But when you have a war that's being fought, that many people see as being fought against Islam, it heightens these issues. And I think that's what's happened recently with the blasphemy laws.
Okay, final question from the floor.
I'm an Australian-based journalist who writes for Pakistan media. Anyway, it's not a warning. Looking beyond your murder of your father and looking beyond the tragedies which happened with Bhutto family, do you plan to do anything for the Pakistani masses who are suffering from two major problems, one of which you also hinted? And these two problems are contributing substantially to the rise of extremism. One, the perpetuation of political dynasties. And of course, Bhutto family is one of the dynasties, and people don't know how to get rid of these dynasties. And secondly, the most primitive land ownership pattern, so much so that some term it not feudalism, but serfdom and fiefdom, which is perpetuating. What do you plan to do about these two problems? Of course, there are tragedies with your families, but do you look beyond that?
Yes. If you're asking what I'm planning to do about the first one, which is the dynasty, I plan not to enter politics. So that's your answer there. And it's very easy to get rid of dynasties, you just don't vote for them. Secondly, about feudalism in Pakistan, I've written about it quite extensively, and certainly in my book. And it was, in fact, under Zulfikar Bhutto that the last land reforms Pakistan has ever seen were carried out. As I am not going into politics, I'm not sure what I can do for you in terms of land reforms, except to speak out in support of them, which I have always done.
And in terms of speaking out, I mean, you are quite vocal. You are very critical of all of these issues. Doesn't that automatically make you a target? I mean, given what has happened in Pakistan in recent history?
You know, I think a lot of Pakistanis, at least certainly a lot of young Pakistanis, feel similarly about these issues. And there are many, many, many Pakistanis that say these things. It's just that, you know, the volume isn't turned up on them. Does it put me at risk? You know, I don't know. I think under this government, certainly, it is more risky than maybe under other governments or under other times. But, you know, I do always say, and I do genuinely believe it to be true, that silence is far more dangerous in a country like Pakistan. We are where we are right now because of a collective culture of silence that says fear should be listened to more. That if we're afraid enough, then that's a reason not to do anything or not to say anything. And that's a cycle that has to be broken, just as much as the gentleman pointed out, dynasties or feudalism. Is this incredible culture we have of allowing the state to do what it pleases. And we allow it to do so with our participation if we remain silent.
Well, Fatima Bhutto, thanks for joining us tonight. This is really a very, very readable book, and I think it's given really wonderful context. And if I could just congratulate it, it's really, really well written.
Thank you.
I think that the writing is very elegant and very stylish. I certainly had a good time reading this book, and I felt there was quite a strong personal, emotional content that kind of took me on the journey with you. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements. For those of you who can get up to Sydney in the next couple of days, Fatima will be speaking again tomorrow at the festival and then again on Saturday. She will also be available to sign the books after the session out in the foyer. So if you'd like a copy signed, that'll be very good. And just on a personal note, I've also got a session tomorrow evening. If you're in Sydney, Ingrid Betancourt, one of the other big star attractions of the festival this year, will be speaking to me in a similar kind of format as tonight. Fatima Bhutto, thank you very much.
Thank you.